The September air in Charlotte, North Carolina carried that particular weight, the kind that sat heavy on your chest before a storm rolled in off the Piedmont. Inside the Mecklenburg County Medical Center, though, the air was different, sterile, cold, the kind of cold that had nothing to do with temperature. Dr. Raymond Holloway moved through the corridors of the hospital's internal medicine wing, the way a man moves when he spent 23 years being told he's the smartest person in every room he walks into. Shoulders back, chin slightly elevated. A practiced unhurriedness that was really just arrogance wearing a white coat. He was good at his job. Nobody disputed that. Board-certified internist, chief of medicine for the past 6 years. The kind of doctor who got his name on the hospital's annual report every year alongside words like distinguished and visionary. He knew it. His staff knew it. And if you somehow forgot, Raymond Holloway had a way of reminding you. Marcus Webb had driven 40 minutes from Concord to get here. He was 51 years old, a former construction foreman who'd spent 3 decades pouring concrete and hauling steel in the Carolina heat. His hands showed it, thick-knuckled, calloused, the kind of hands that told a story without him having to say a word. He'd been having chest tightness for 6 weeks. His wife, Denise, had been after him for 4 of those weeks to see someone. He finally listened. The receptionist sent him to exam room 7. A nurse named Patricia took his vitals, noted his blood pressure was elevated, and told him the doctor would be right in. Marcus sat on the crinkled paper of the examination table and waited. He'd brought a list on a folded piece of notebook paper. Symptoms, when they started, what made them worse. Denise had told him to write everything down so he wouldn't forget. Dr. Holloway came in 14 minutes later without knocking. He glanced at the chart on the door, stepped inside, and barely looked up when he said, "Mr. Webb." "That's me," Marcus said. He started to unfold his paper. Holloway was already scrolling through something on the wall-mounted tablet. "Says here chest tightness, 6 weeks. Any history of cardiac issues?" "No, sir. That's actually what I wanted to talk about. I wrote some things down. On a scale of 1 to 10, pain level." Marcus paused. "It's more pressure than pain, like something sitting on my 1 to 10, 4, maybe 5, but it changes depending on any shortness of breath." Marcus took a slow breath. "Some, mostly when I climb stairs, or do you smoke?" "I quit 11 years ago." Holloway made a note, still hadn't really looked at him. Marcus held up his folded paper. "I wrote down when the symptoms started, what I've been doing when they hit. My wife thought it might help, if..." Dr. Holloway finally glanced over. He looked at the notebook paper, the way someone looks at a child who's brought a finger painting to a board meeting. "That won't be necessary," he said. "I have the information I need." Marcus lowered the paper slowly. "Your blood pressure's high. That alone can cause the symptoms you're describing. We'll get you on a low-dose ACE inhibitor, check your cholesterol, and follow up in 6 weeks. Cut back on sodium, get 30 minutes of walking in 3 days a week." He was already moving toward the door. "Doctor." Marcus's voice was quiet, measured. "The pressure gets worse at night. Sometimes I wake up and my left arm feels heavy. That started about 2 weeks ago." Holloway stopped, turned. There was something in his expression, not quite irritation, but close to it. The expression of a man who considered being questioned a kind of inconvenience. "Mr. Webb," he said, with the careful enunciation of someone explaining something to a person they consider slow, "left arm heaviness in patients your age and demographic is almost always musculoskeletal. You said you worked construction. 30 years of that work does things to the shoulder, the rotator cuff. What you're feeling is almost certainly referred pain, not cardiac." "Almost certainly," Marcus repeated. "With high probability. Yes, but not definitely." Something shifted behind Holloway's eyes. "I have 23 years of..." "I'm not questioning your years," Marcus said. He was still calm. That was the thing about Marcus Webb. Denise always said he got quieter when he was serious, not louder. "I'm just saying that the arm heaviness at night, combined with the chest pressure, combined with the fact that my father died of a heart attack at 53, I'd feel better if we could rule things out." Dr. Holloway set the tablet down on the counter. He crossed his arms. "Your father's cardiac history has been noted, but I'm the physician here. I'm telling you what I'm seeing clinically, and what I'm seeing does not warrant an EKG or a stress test based on the presentation." "Why not?" "Because," and here Holloway's voice dropped into that register, the one that people in positions of unchecked authority reach for when they feel their expertise being questioned by someone they've already decided doesn't have the standing to question it. Those tests have costs and risks and are ordered based on clinical judgment, which is what you came here for. If you'd like to see another physician, you're welcome to request that. But I'd suggest, respectfully, that you trust the process, he said, respectfully the way people say it when they mean the opposite. Marcus looked at him for a long moment. He refolded his piece of notebook paper, tucked it into the pocket of his flannel shirt. "All right," he said quietly. Holloway left the room. The door didn't quite slam, but it closed with more authority than necessary. Patricia, the nurse, came back in 10 minutes later with the prescription information and the follow-up card. She looked at Marcus with an expression he recognized, the small, helpless apology in someone's eyes when they've witnessed something they couldn't stop. "He's like that with everyone," she said out loud. She looked immediately like she regretted it. Marcus just nodded. "I know," he said. He didn't mean Holloway specifically. He meant something larger, something he'd been navigating his whole life. He drove home to Concord. Denise was waiting on the porch. He told her what happened. She listened without interrupting, which meant she was angrier than she was letting on. "You should have pushed harder," she said. "I did push her. You should have pushed harder." He didn't argue. He went inside, sat in his recliner, and felt that familiar pressure settle back into his chest like it had never left. 3 days later, at 2:17 in the morning, Marcus Webb woke up with his left arm completely numb and a pain in his chest that was nothing like 4 out of 10. Denise called 911 before he finished his first sentence. The paramedics arrived in 8 minutes. The EKG they ran in the ambulance showed what Dr. Raymond Holloway had decided without looking, without listening, without running a single test, was not there. STEMI, ST elevation myocardial infarction. A major heart attack. He was in surgery within 40 minutes of arriving at Carolina's medical center. A different hospital. A different set of hands. Dr. Yolanda Reese, a cardiologist who'd been doing this for 16 years, placed the stent, cleared the blockage, and later told Denise in a quiet hallway that if Marcus had waited another few hours, they would have been having a different conversation. Marcus spent 4 days in the ICU and then 3 more in recovery. Denise barely left his side. Their daughter drove up from Atlanta on the first night. He wasn't angry, he told people later. He'd moved past angry somewhere around day 2 in the hospital, when the medications would keep him calm and he had nothing but time to think. What he felt was something older and heavier than anger, something that didn't have a clean name. What he knew was this: he had walked into that office with a folded piece of paper and a family history and 6 weeks of symptoms and a question, and a man with letters after his name had looked through him and made a decision before the exam had even started. His daughter, Keisha, was the one who found it. She was 28, a healthcare policy analyst, who worked for the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services. She'd spent the last 3 years compiling data on racial disparities in cardiac care outcomes across the state. She knew the literature. She knew the numbers. She also knew that her father had almost died because a doctor had decided, in under 4 minutes, that his symptoms didn't warrant basic diagnostic testing. She asked Marcus if she could file a formal complaint with the hospital's patient relations office. He said yes. She asked if he'd be willing to give a recorded statement. He said yes to that too. What Keisha did not tell her father. Not immediately. Not while he was still recovering. Not while the hospital gown was still hanging on the back of the bathroom door. Was that 3 weeks before his heart attack, she had been appointed to the North Carolina Medical Board's newly formed Patient Safety Review Panel. The panel had been created specifically to investigate systemic issues in clinical decision-making across the state's hospital networks. Mecklenburg County Medical Center was on their review list. The complaint Keisha filed on her father's behalf was thorough. It was 22 pages. It included the timeline of the appointment, the documented exchange, Patricia the nurse's voluntary written account, the ambulance EKG results, Dr. Reese's surgical notes, and a medical literature review on implicit bias in cardiac care assessments. Specifically, the documented pattern of black male patients' cardiac symptoms being systematically undertreated compared to white patients presenting with identical symptom profiles. She didn't file it quietly. She filed it through the proper channels, which meant it landed in the patient relations office, the hospital's chief medical officer's inbox, and, because of her panel appointment, it was simultaneously flagged for the medical board's review process. Dr. Raymond Holloway received notification of the complaint on a Tuesday afternoon. His assistant, Linda, brought it to him between his 2 p.m. and 3 p.m. appointments, the way she brought him everything efficiently, without commentary. He read the first page and his expression didn't change much. He'd had complaints before. Minor things easily explained. Medicine wasn't an exact science, and patients who didn't understand clinical decision-making sometimes confused thoroughness with callousness. It was something he'd navigated before. He sent the notification to his medical malpractice insurance carrier and forwarded it to the hospital's legal team. Standard procedure. He didn't think about Marcus Webb again that day. He should have read further. The hospital's chief medical officer was Dr. Sandra Pittman, a woman who had been cleaning up Raymond Holloway's quiet disasters for 6 years and smiling through gritted teeth at board meetings while doing it. She had fielded 3 previous informal complaints about his bedside manner, all of which had been resolved through internal channels and a brief mandatory patient communication refresher that Holloway completed online in 40 minutes and never thought about again. Dr. Pittman had kept each of those files. She was meticulous that way. When Keisha Webb's 22-page complaint arrived in her inbox, Dr. Pittman read every page. Then she read it again. Then she called her assistant and asked her to pull the prior complaint files. The legal team called Holloway's attorney on Wednesday. The attorney called Holloway on Thursday morning. "This one's different," his attorney said. The attorney's name was Gerald Park, and he had a talent for stating things plainly. "The complainant isn't just a family member. She's on the medical board panel that's currently reviewing this hospital. That means this complaint doesn't stay internal." There was a pause on the line. "She's what?" "Keisha Webb. Appointed 3 weeks ago. Her credentials are significant. She's authored 2 published studies on racial disparities in emergency cardiac care in the Southeast. She's not filing this as a grieving daughter. She's filing this as someone who knows exactly what she's looking at." The silence on the line was different now. The hospital's formal response process required a face-to-face meeting. It was scheduled for the following Wednesday at 10 a.m. in Dr. Pittman's office, a room that Holloway had noted over the years was smaller than his own office, though she outranked him. He'd always found that mildly amusing. He didn't find it amusing now. He arrived 7 minutes early. His attorney arrived with him. They sat in the chairs across from Dr. Pittman's desk, and Holloway adjusted his cufflinks in the way he did when he was working to appear more relaxed than he was. The door opened. Keisha Webb walked in. She was not what Raymond Holloway had assembled in his mind over the past week. He had constructed something brittle and reactive. A grieving daughter running on adrenaline and pain. Easy to redirect, easy to manage with the right combination of clinical language and measured condescension. What walked into that room was composed. She wore a grey blazer over a white shirt, carried a leather portfolio, and sat down across from him with the particular stillness of someone who has spent years in rooms full of people who underestimated her and learned to use that stillness as a tool. She looked at him directly. He looked away first. He wasn't certain why. Dr. Pittman opened the meeting. She outlined the complaint, the timeline, the scope of the review. She spoke precisely and without warmth. Gerald Park interjected twice with procedural questions. Keisha answered both questions without consulting her notes. "Dr. Holloway," Dr. Pittman said, turning to him, "I want to give you the opportunity to walk us through your clinical reasoning during the September 14th appointment." He did. He was good at this, organized, articulate, technically sound. He explained the presenting symptoms, the assessment of elevated blood pressure, as the primary driver, the rationale for deferring diagnostic testing. He used the right words. He sounded like what he was, a physician with 23 years of experience explaining a clinical decision. When he finished, Keisha Webb opened her portfolio. She placed 3 documents on the table. "The American Heart Association's 2023 Guidelines on Chest Pain Evaluation," she said, pointing to the first, under which a patient presenting with exertional chest pressure, nocturnal symptoms, left arm heaviness, a first-degree relative with fatal MI under 60, and elevated blood pressure meets the threshold for immediate EKG and risk stratification. Not optional. Threshold. She tapped the second document. A 2022 JAMA internal medicine study which I co-authored, documenting that black male patients presenting with identical cardiac symptom profiles to white patients are 43% less likely to receive diagnostic testing in their initial clinical encounter, 43%. She tapped the third, my father's surgical report, documenting a 91% blockage in the LAD, the left anterior descending artery, often called the widowmaker, which was present on September 14th, which would have been detectable with a basic EKG and a troponin draw, which he was denied. The room was quiet. Holloway's attorney touched his arm. Holloway didn't move. Dr. Holloway, Keisha said, and her voice had not changed. Not in pitch, not in temperature, not in the measured quality that had held steady since she walked in. My father wrote down his symptoms on a piece of notebook paper because my mother told him to write everything down so he wouldn't forget. You didn't look at it. You made a determination about what his body was and wasn't doing before you'd been in the room for 4 minutes. And 3 days later, he nearly died. She closed the portfolio. I'm not here because I'm angry, she said. I'm here because this is the 4th complaint filed against you in 6 years, and the previous 3 were managed quietly, internally, and without consequence. I'm here because I sit on the panel that determines whether this hospital maintains its accreditation with the state, and I'm here because my father deserved a physician who looked at him. The silence after that was not like other silences in that room. It had weight. Gerald Park began to say something about the nature of clinical judgment and the inherent variability of Mr. Park, Dr. Pittman said, and her voice was quiet. I don't believe that's going to be helpful right now. Gerald Park stopped. The formal review took 11 weeks. The medical board panel, of which Keisha Webb appropriately recused herself from the specific Holloway matter, while remaining on the broader hospital review, brought in 2 independent physicians to assess the September 14th appointment documentation against standard of care guidelines. Their findings aligned with Keisha's complaint on every substantive point. Dr. Raymond Holloway received a formal censure from the North Carolina Medical Board. He was required to complete 40 hours of continuing medical educations, specifically focused on implicit bias in clinical assessment and cardiac care disparities. He was removed from his position as Chief of Medicine at Mecklenburg County Medical Center. The decision was not made by Dr. Pittman alone, though she supported it. It was made by a board that now had on record a pattern of behavior, 4 complaints, and a near-fatal outcome. The hospital settled with Marcus Webb outside of litigation. The terms were confidential, though Denise later said the amount was enough to make Marcus's cardiologist visits for the rest of his life not something they had to worry about. Holloway kept his medical license. He moved to a smaller practice in Gaston County. People who knew him said he was different there, quieter, less certain of things, which some of his former colleagues found troubling and others found overdue. Marcus Webb did his cardiac rehab at a facility in Concord 3 mornings a week. He was good at it, steady, consistent, the same way he'd been good at everything physical his whole life. That particular discipline of a man who'd spent decades doing hard work in the heat and learned that showing up mattered more than anything else. His therapist, a young man named Darius, told him after 6 weeks that his progress was exceptional. You're strong, Darius told him. Been told that before, Marcus said. He said it without bitterness, but he said it with something that lived in the space between what people assumed about a man like him and what was actually true. Keisha visited on a Sunday in December. She brought her husband and their 2 kids, and Denise cooked enough food for a small church gathering. They sat on the back porch after dinner, Marcus and Keisha, while the kids chased fireflies in the yard even though it was too cold for fireflies and they were only finding moths. You know I didn't do this for you, Keisha said. She looked at the yard when she said it. I know, Marcus said. I did, but not only. I know that too. He leaned back in his chair. The pressure in his chest was gone. Had been gone since the surgery, mostly, with the exception of the anxiety that arrived sometimes at 2 a.m. and had to be talked back down. His doctors said that was normal, his body remembering what it knew. How many people you think walked out of his office with something wrong? Marcus said, and didn't make it to the ER in time? Keisha was quiet for a moment. That's why I filed 22 pages, she said. He nodded, looked at the yard. The moths the kids were chasing had a frantic, hapless quality. Bumping against the porch light, circling back, bumping again. They didn't know what they were drawn to or why. They just kept coming back to the light. Your mama was right, Marcus said finally. About what? Writing things down. Keisha laughed. It was a real laugh, sudden and unguarded, the kind that sounds like relief. Marcus smiled into the dark of the yard and let it sit there, that laugh, for a while before either of them said anything else. Some things get written down because you're afraid you'll forget. Some things get written down because you know someone will need to read them later. Marcus Webb had shown up to that appointment with a folded piece of paper, a family history, and a question. He had been told his question didn't matter. It turned out that it mattered quite a lot.